From Informa Tech Target, I'm Beth Pariseau, and this is IT Ops Query. This podcast distills the signal from the noise about enterprise software development and platform engineering. Each week, we'll talk to expert guests about the latest tech industry news and trends that engineering and IT leaders need to know. Don't forget to subscribe to IT Ops Query for more conversations on AI and the future of the enterprise digital workspace. Brendan Burns is a co-founder of the Kubernetes open source project and corporate vice president for Azure Cloud Native and Management Platform at Microsoft. He is also the author and co-author of several books on Kubernetes and distributed systems. Prior to Microsoft, he worked on Google's web search infrastructure and the Google Cloud Platform. Hey, Brendan, thanks for joining.
Hey there, how's it going?
So obviously, AI is the topic du jour. It's driving changes in enterprise infrastructure all over the place. What do you think have been the most significant changes in that area over the last 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, when I look at how we're applying it to our teams, there's two major categories. I think the first is toil reduction. So figuring out places where we can automate tasks that, honestly, developers may not find that appealing. And it's sort of taking it past what I would call sort of static automation that we had in the past, where you might, rev a dependency version, or you might be able to do limited introspection of code. We've actually been able to do more significant refactors to adopt new versions of libraries, for example, right? A lot of times it's just a version upgrade, but sometimes, it's a major version upgrade. The API has changed a little bit. That's a case where in the past, that change might have gotten deferred for a while, and you wouldn't get the security updates or whatever that came with the new version. Now, with code, with Copilot and agent mode in Copilot, those changes become a lot easier to do and are toil for an developer. And then the other place I think is just enabling way better summarization. So we have a ton of data, especially my, in Azure, in the Azure Resource Manager team. We have a ton of data about all of the different things that people have deployed to Azure, but it's not always easy to figure out the right ways to query through that data. And we've done a ton of work through the Azure Copilot and the Azure Resource Graph teams to integrate a chat-based interface to all of the resources that you have in Azure, so that you can use a very natural language-based way of exploring your infrastructure without having to be a database expert in order to set up exactly the right query to integrate all these different resources together. So I think both of those things, that toil reduction that in the end actually helps us be more reliable and more secure, as well as deeper insights, better insights, not having to become an expert in all these systems for my operations, have been some really key things that have been happening.
And so how have customers, IT organizations adapted to that? How are they using those summarization capabilities or taking advantage of the reduced toil time?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that when you're looking at how Azure Copilot is working, it's integrated right into the end user's experience, or the IT operator's experience of Azure. So what we've discovered is that previously we had a web interface to Azure, and we had a command line interface to Azure, and an API interface to Azure. And now there's a chat interface to Azure. And I think we really are seeing that chat is a new modality. It's not sort of an add-on. And I think that, we're with that team, we are really focused on figuring out how do we develop the right interfaces for that modality. And that includes, on the Azure side, building a lot of MCP servers, which are a gateway between that agent and the actions they might want to take. And I think we're seeing that from other people as well, that they're looking to build MCP servers that know and understand their own infrastructure, and can kind of bridge the gap between our perspective, which is obviously a very general perspective. We have the perspective of all of Azure, and then they can provide a perspective which is specific to their organization.
So what is the upshot of all of that on the buy side for people who are consuming Azure services? What is the result for them?
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, people want to deliver, they don't just buy Azure because they want to put it on the shelf, right? It's not like it's a Beanie Baby or something like that. they are building services, they are operating services. There's a business objective that they're trying to achieve, and I think all of these tools do two things. One is that they enable them to achieve those objectives more easily, right? So they can run a more reliable service, they can run a more secure service more easily. They could take more advantage of pieces of Azure that they may not have previously known about because they're more discoverable. Um, and then also they can free up their time so that they can focus on the business value that they're trying to deliver, as opposed to, maybe reading through all the documentation to figure out how to set up auto scaling on a particular success, right?
Mm.
So I think we're moving from, I was talking to someone the other day. I think we're in the midst of a move between declarative infrastructure to intent-based infrastructure,
Mm.
where I don't have to say exactly, I want 3 of this, I want 2 of that, which is sort of the world of infrastructure as code. I think we're moving with AI towards a world where we're saying, I want there to be a reliable web service, right? I
Right.
want there to be a service that can serve around the world. And, I think still steps to go, but we're already taking steps in that direction towards being able to reason about a user's intent,
Mm.
and take actions on to achieve that intent, as opposed to sort of forcing them to declare up front all of the different pieces that they want.
Right. So then there's the question of governance and control there, right? Like who decides what reliable means in that case?
Right. So, I mean, I think that the thing is that at the end of the day, we don't take any actions that the user couldn't take themselves.
Hmm.
Right. And
Okay.
so any governance and control in terms of access control or in terms of Azure policy, um, that they have set up on their infrastructure, those all still apply. Right.
Hmm.
And in fact, one of the most interesting challenges is being able to come up with suggestions that match the end user's policy.
Hmm.
Right. So
Yeah.
a corporate, something as simple as a corporate policy may have established a pattern for how they name their resources.
Hmm.
Right.
Right.
It's a very specific per company kind of thing to have to go do.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you're going to suggest to someone how they should uh, deploy a service, it has to match those kinds of corporate policies, or else it just doesn't work. And so those are really interesting challenges that, if I'm being honest, we're still reasoning through the best ways to address. But something that we discovered very early, that it's easy to give a generic suggestion.
Hmm.
It requires a little bit more knowledge to be able to give a suggestion that works in the context of an enterprise's IT administration, existing IT administration, because that stuff's not going away, right? You still
Right.
need governance, you still need control, um, and so we need to be developing things that work within that environment, and are not a workaround.
Right. So how far are we away from that, do you think?
I mean, I think it's always an increment, like any other
Mm.
product. It's always an incremental improvement, sort of one step at a time,
Hmm.
right? I think that we can do a really good job. I mean, I think I've always felt like the co-pilot um, phrasing was the best one, right? Because it is a co-developed thing. It's not a it's not a go do it on its own thing. It's a thing where it's going to propose things to you. It's going to help you learn. It's going to help you achieve things more quickly. But at the end of the day, we need the user input as well to say, hey, actually, I need it to look more like this. Oh, I can't deploy things into that region.
So are you seeing an increased desire for multi-cloud deployments among customers, though, in general, kind of at a
I
high
mean, I don't
level?
know if I would say an increased desire. I feel like the desire's always been there.
Hmm.
And maybe, that's unique to Azure users, but I don't think so. I think there's always been a desire for multi-cloud. And if you look at like the things that we've been doing for years at this point with Azure Arc, it's reflected that notion that our customers are going to be hybrid, our customers are going to be multi-cloud. Um, and we want to provide them with capabilities, right? Because as you're building these kinds of AI agents for introspecting what your landscape looks like, you don't want to have 3 different agents. You don't want to have 3 different chat portals. You want all of that information integrated into a single place. And that's what the combination of Azure Arc and the Azure Copilot can do for you. Because if you connect resources in AWS to Arc, and you connect resources in GCP to Arc, and you connect resources in a VMware or other on-premise infrastructure to Azure Arc. Suddenly, all those resources are represented in Azure, and obviously we can visualize them. But more importantly, our AI can reason over them, and so those same queries that could tell you, what are the out-of-date databases that I have in Azure, can now give you a summary of out-of-date databases you have across your entire IT landscape. I think that's a pretty unique capability that we have that really provides that single pane of glass with the AI summarization and augmentation that is very compelling for people who are operating in a multi-cloud world.
So maybe nearer and dearer to your heart would be Kubernetes. And obviously there have been some changes in the upstream project to accommodate AI workloads and, GPUs and the like. So how do you think, there's anything left to update in Kubernetes or the ecosystem to better support AI workloads?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at Kubernetes specifically, I think a lot of the APIs that are being developed are still in beta and still being refined and being pushed out. If you look at the way GPUs are managed, or you look at things like group scheduling, which is the ability to kind of say, I want these 6 pods to all land on the same machine or the same group of machines. Those are all capabilities that have been developed fairly recently in support of AI workloads, and are still, I think, getting adoption and getting maturity. So I expect that we will see that continue. But I think that's not quite as interesting, perhaps, as the broader open source AI ecosystem. And so we've seen a ton of really great projects gain traction that my upstream open source team is going and contributing to, whether that's something like the Ray project. I had the opportunity to keynote at Ray Summit this past fall, where we got to meet with a bunch of people in that community, or the work that's happening in the VLLM and LLMD community, where we collaborate with Red Hat and others, as well as a number of projects that we do ourselves, like the KAITO project, that is attempting to make AI infrastructure easier to use for everyone. I think there's sort of the Cambrian explosion that happens out in open source when suddenly everybody is interested and has hard problems and realizes that the best way to solve a hard problem is to solve it together, and to work on those open source projects. And I think we're still in that. There's a lot of different solutions out there. We want to make sure that they all run really awesome on top of Azure, and then over time, I think projects combine, or one project becomes the predominant choice, and there's a sort of consolidation that happens. But I think right now the exciting thing is we're still shaping it. It reminds me of the early days of containers and containerization, where there's a lot of choices, and also a lot of complexity. And so because of that, I think we're in as a cloud provider, I feel like our job is to help people sort through the complexity and make it easy for them to adopt these technologies as they get developed.
So tell me about KAITO. I haven't heard about that one. When did that start, and what exactly does it do?
Yeah, so KAITO is the Kubernetes AI Toolkit operator. It's a bit of a mouthful. But we started more than a year ago, and the real mission there was basically to say, for the average person, they sort of have this idea of like, I have a model out there. It's an open source model, and I want to use it. But I don't necessarily want to have to become a deploying models onto Kubernetes expert in order to be able to do inference on Kubernetes, right? Because most people don't, the truth is that most people don't want to become AI experts. They want to build AI applications, right? And they don't necessarily want to learn, how do I take a model and break it up and distribute it across a bunch of machines? They want to send a prompt into a model and get a response, right? And so KAITO simplifies that whole thing down into a declaration, familiar in the Kubernetes API, a YAML declaration where you can say, I want to serve this model, and you send that that declaration out to the Kubernetes cluster that has KAITO installed. And it takes all care of all of the details of installing the right drivers, downloading the right model from wherever the model is hosted, deploying it out in an inference runtime, setting up a load balancer in front of it so that you have, replication and things like that. It really enables you to consume. I think that what we all said is we want people to be able to consume the concepts without having to worry about the implementation. One of the metaphors I've always used is that there's a big difference between being able to use a lock, right, for synchronization, primitive that you use to do multi-threading code and things like that. Many people can use that lock and do multi-threaded code. It's a lot harder to implement it. And so if you forced everybody to implement it in order to use it, you'd have a lot less people using that kind of code. And the same thing's true for AI. I think that it's hard to implement a scalable, reliable solution. But everybody can kind of understand, hey, I take a prompt, I put it into a model, I get a response back. Right. And so the whole purpose of KAITO is to simplify and democratize that process of inference and other AI activities. And so we're pretty excited about it as an open source project. We've integrated it into Azure. But again, I think that we're in this world where there's a lot of different solutions out there, right? So we want to make sure that all kinds of solutions are successful on AKS and on Azure, and make sure that the best of the open source is available on top of AKS.
Cool. So, I mean, do you think that Kubernetes is going to remain the main control plane for AI infrastructure too? Or do you think as we move toward that intent-based infrastructure idea, something new might take its place or grow out of it?
No, I mean, I think this has always been, there's always been this discussion. I think that I wouldn't say that it's ever going to be replaced. I think the more interesting question is, how visible is it still? Right?
Right.
Because the Linux kernel is still underneath the Kubernetes and the x86 processor is still underneath the Linux kernel. But, people just don't they don't talk about it very much. Right. And so I think there's an interesting open question of how much is the Kubernetes part still front and center? And how much of it is like the Linux kernel or the x86 processor, and it falls away as a part of the implementation stack, but not something you necessarily think about. And I think the jury's still out on that, right? I think there's a lot of, whether you look at KAITO or you look at KubeRay or you look at LLMD, there's a number of AI open source projects that are integrating pretty natively with Kubernetes. When you use them, you feel like you're interacting with Kubernetes resources. But there's other projects that build on top and kind of hide the Kubernetes from you, whether those are proprietary solutions or open source solutions. A lot of AI is happening behind the scenes that runs on top of Kubernetes, but you wouldn't necessarily see.
Right.
Right. And so I think both of those are possibilities, and I think we'll just have to wait and see what becomes the most popular solution is probably going to dictate how visible, the Kubernetes parts are or aren't to the end user.
Right. So, looking ahead to the still relatively new year, what further changes do you think AI will drive in cloud infrastructure this year going forward? What's the next frontier?
Well, I think that the next frontier is really, it's been something that's been evolving for a little bit. But something that I've been pushing my teams on a lot is changing their mindset around what's hard and what's easy. I think that's the most important thing that is happening. In my mind, AI is a tool, right? And the great thing about it's a very powerful tool. And the great thing about powerful tools is they take something that used to be really hard and they make it easy. And that requires us to change our mindset about how we think about problems. I think the truth is, as humans, we look at a problem and we say, oh, it's going to take 4 weeks and it's going to be annoying. And if there's something else that is going to take a week and is super easy, we gravitate towards the easy solution. And I think what's happening with AI and the developments there is that things that used to be toilsome, used to be annoying, used to take a long time, are now things that you can just expect, someone to do in a week.
Hmm.
Something that used to be a foreground, have to do it all the time activity becomes something that can run in the background.
Hmm.
And you're never going to take advantage of those superpowers effectively if you don't sort of rethink what's hard and what's easy, right? So, I think there's a tendency to fixate on the technology.
Yeah.
But actually, I think the important thing is to fixate on, what were the assumptions that I made based on the old technology that are changing, in the new technology with
Can,
the addition of new technology.
can you give me an example of that? Like of a process that used to be hard is now easy, or used to be foreground can now run background?
Sure. I mean, so like just a trivial example would be something like unit testing,
Hmm.
right? So, ideally in an ideal world, every single file is ready to be unit tested, has unit tests already. But the truth is that in a legacy code base, there's, files that might not have unit tests.
Mm-hmm.
Now, someone comes along and makes a change there. Um, Now, typically, when someone makes a change in a code base, we would tell that person, you need to write a unit test to prove that your change works. But, I would say 3 or 4 years ago, if the test infrastructure wasn't there and the change was relatively small and you could sort of look at it and be like, yeah, I think that change is correct, you wouldn't make the person write the unit test infrastructure because the amount of work associated
Mm.
with scaffolding up a whole new unit test just to test these 3 lines change, you'd be taking what used to, what was going to take somebody an hour maybe and turn it into a day,
Mm.
or take something, that would have taken a day and turned it into a week,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it might involve refactors and mocking, and there's a lot of different stuff that pulling that thread could reveal. I think now the expectation is, yeah, you'll ask that person to do it, and you'll tell them to use a GitHub Copilot to do it.
Mm.
And I think there's a lot of examples of that across the spectrum, and where we are saying, it's no longer okay to say, here's the document that describes how you should make a change. You need to provide a prompt that can
Mm.
automate the change. Um, and that has ripple effects, because a lot of times when we do these scale out motions for, you need to adopt this new library, or you need to do some other form of hardening on your application, we write a document on how you're supposed to do it, and then we fan it out to a bunch of teams, and that
Mm.
puts work and toil onto every single team. And I think with an expectation that, that's a prompt, now suddenly that's something that they can just integrate into their AI automation, and not have to, learn about it, dedicate an engineer to it, and things like that.
Right. So, do you see customer organizations having the same kind of adjustment to make, or is there what should they know about AI and infrastructure management that they don't know today?
Yeah, I mean, I had a chance to talk, to give a similar talk to a bunch of leaders at one of our customers a while back, and I wanted, the most important point I sort of put out to everybody was that leaders should be using this technology themselves. If you just read a couple of press reports about, whatever something did, you won't really get a sense for the
Mm.
nuances of how to best apply it to your own processes and your own workflows, because, every single enterprise is a little bit different. Um, but if you use it on the daily and you talk to other people who are using it, and you find the people within your organization, usually they're new grads who have been using it, throughout their undergrad and are bringing it into your organization, um, they'll teach you where it's working and where it's not working and where there's real opportunity. And you'll understand how to apply it to the specifics of your world.
Mm.
And I think that's the most important thing, is that, like, it's not that different actually, really, than the cloud native journey, where for a while there, people were just sort of thinking, hey, I'm going to rub some Kubernetes on it, and suddenly I'll
Yeah.
be, agile and cloud native. And you're like,
Mm.
well, it's a little more than just a technology application of technology, and AI is the same way, right? You have to understand, what is the value of this tool? How does it make what you're trying to do easier and better? And the best way to do that is to use it yourself, and apply it to problems that you're trying to solve. And I think actually I would say, like, I've also talked to a bunch of leaders who are suddenly excited because, like, they liked coding. A lot of our tech leaders came from coding, right? And because of demands of time or anything else, their jobs have sort of taken them away from coding. And using AI agents and that sort of thing has actually enabled them to jump back into their team's code bases and contribute in ways that actually make them really happy.
Cool. All right. Well, always good to talk to you. Always good to get your insights on the industry. And thank you for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to IT Ops Query. To learn more about enterprise software development and platform engineering, explore our content on Informa Tech Target sites. Find us on YouTube at our channel, Eye on Tech. Subscribe to our podcast to receive the latest episodes as they drop. And if you liked what you heard today, give us a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Thank you for joining us.